topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, joining you live from Dallas, which is home base for me. If we've not met and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant, organizational logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I help companies to articulate their purpose and build inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose to turn those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant workplace where people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best while growing into their fuller potential. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Also, if you like the content and the guests I bring on the show, you may be interested in my next book coming out in March 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. You can pre-order your copy at bookshop.org, barnesandnoble.com, or Amazon. Now, let's get into today's program. With us is my guest, Dr. Jack Wiley. He's an award-winning organizational psychologist, researcher, author, and leadership consultant. He is president and CEO of both Employee Centricity and Jack Wiley Consulting. He also serves as the chief scientific officer at Engage to Excel. With more than 30 years of experience studying what employees want most and what organizational design factors best promote business success, he is a frequent keynote speaker and media contributor on issues related to the workplace, employee engagement, and retention, as well as leadership effectiveness and business performance. We'll be talking today about one of his 3 books. It's called The Employee-Centric Manager, 8 Keys to People Management Effectiveness. Dr. Wiley, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Dr. Cortez, great to be with you today.
Let's just show off this beautiful thing you created, shall we? Look at this gorgeous book. I love the red, of course. You can see behind me, one of my books is red too. It's beautiful. And what I like to say, Jack, is what you have done here actually, and I can say it because I've been through both experiences, is easier than bringing a child into the world.
Indeed, thank you.
Harder than bringing a child into the world. I've done both. So creating a book and getting it out in the world is very difficult. So not just 1, not 2, but 3. So congrats.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So you and I have some things in common here, which is great to have you on the show. We both seem to be fixated on this notion of the experience of employees as well as effective management and actually creating better workplaces. So I want to know, if you would, a little bit of introduction as to how you got to where you are and where did this fascination come from?
Right. Well, thank you for that. As you indicated, my background, my training is in organizational psychology. For those in your audience who may not know what that is, it's basically psychology applied to the workplace. Mm-hmm. I started my career in large corporate settings and spent time working as an internal psychologist, supporting management and the accomplishment of what they had in mind with regard to the HR practices. But then in 1986, I formed a company along with a partner called Gans Wiley Research. We conducted what is now called employee engagement surveys and customer satisfaction surveys for customers, clients all around the world. And I built that practice up over a 20-year time frame. Bought my original partner out after the first 3.5 years. And eventually I sold that practice to a fast-growing HR technology company known as Connexa. Okay. I stayed with Connexa, started a new division for them, the High Performance Institute. And then we built that business up such that in 2013, it was acquired by IBM. At that point, I left the organization. And about a year later, I started an academic program at a university in Indiana, known as Manchester University, where students could major in psychology with a concentration in IO psychology. And I was involved in that for 6 years. It was quite a substantial change in orientation for me, but a pleasant one with great colleagues and very good students as well. But I wanted to leave the university so actually I could focus on the writing of this book. I had the research collected. I had tremendous interest in getting these ideas and concepts out there. And so I left the university, and about a year later, the book was published.
You are a walking billboard for what we can do when we're passionate about something, Dr. Wiley. You really are. It's wonderful. It's delightful. I also have researched meaning and work and identity alongside it for several years. And when I started this radio show, Working in Purpose, 8 years ago, I actually started by focusing on stories of people that were passionate about their work, because I discovered in my work that people didn't know that you could be passionate about what you do. And so, of course, the show has evolved a lot since then, but it certainly is wonderful to be in the presence of somebody who clearly is committed, devoted, and passionate about the work that you do. It's really fantastic.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I found really interesting, and you start this pretty early in the book here, is it's kind of a breathtaking thing to report, but you've been asking, you asking people what they want from their managers. And you said you've actually, in fact, asked this question to over 80,000 employees in 27 countries around the world. And the book, of course, reveals what they've told you. And I think that's pretty arresting to recognize the depth and the breadth of the research that you've done here, Dr. Wiley. That's amazing.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I would agree. I think that's a differentiator in this space. The way I would position this would be that what's in the book is truly the employee voice. I mean, we have some great leadership theories out there that have served us well, but actually this leadership theory would be different from all others in the sense that it's entirely derived from what employees had to say. And so the simple question that was posed to them was, what is the most important thing you want from your immediate boss? Now, I was in a very fortunate position with a very strong research team to be able to conduct this research with representative samples of workers around the world, representing all major industry groups, job levels, job types, gender, educational levels, and so forth. We were truly interested in a representative sample of workers. We obtained that from 27 countries around the world, as you indicated. That represents about 85% of the world's gross domestic product in terms of the economies represented. And so what I was aiming for was a universal statement about what employees most want from their immediate boss.
I have to ask, I'm sorry, I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach. Do you know your strengths? Do you have Maximizer in your top 5? You must. It's an excellence standard is what it is. It really speaks to excellence. And it surely seems to me, Dr. Wiley, that you are out for excellence. So if you don't know your strengths, you should go discover them. And I can actually send you an assessment link for that. But I have to know if Maximizer is in your top 5. Okay, so what you found and what's in the book here, and this show is really first educational and also inspirational. So I want to be able to instruct and teach our listeners and viewers today about the general contents of your book, and then have them dive in for all the details like I did, because as you could tell, I read your book cover to cover, as I'm prone to do. So what I want to be able to illustrate, ladies and gentlemen who are listening and watching, is that Dr. Wiley has indicated 8 fundamental attributes in his book that are essential for effective management, what employees actually want. It's 5 behaviors, 2 values, and 1 skill. So I want to dive into each one if we can. So the first one is behavior. The first behavior is show support and understanding. Can you talk about that and color that for us a little bit?
Right. And actually, Elise, what we found out was that this was the most frequently identified attribute that employees want from their managers, that their managers show support and understanding. So really, this is about managers being available, present, making sure employees have what they need to get the job done. Encouraging, we might call them empathetic leaders. The understanding part is very important because it has to do with listening. You're not going to listen until you invest the time and energy to make sure that you are engaged in that particular behavior. And of course, through listening, you're going to better understand what employees want and provide them in response with what they need to get their job done. So this is really about, being a good person, being encouraging, being empathetic, and available. If you're not available, you're not being supportive and understanding.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I noted in your book and in my own notes about this particular behavior, showing support and understanding, is also ensuring that employees know who you are. So, and of course, that's authenticity, right? And I'm amazed at how many managers still believe it's important to hold their cards close to their vest and so they say that, and I know you know this, right? So they say that because I don't want people. They say I don't want to get to know my people too well, because if I have to fire them, then it's harder for me. And I'm okay, but while they're still with you, wouldn't it be nice if they actually knew who you were?
Right. Yeah. I mean, your managers are leaving far too much on the table if they're not willing to get to know their employees. So expressing interest in them, being able to answer questions about yourself, getting to know them on a personal level, all of this contributes to that sense that I work for a manager who is indeed supportive and understanding of who I am, where I'm coming from, what I'm trying to accomplish. And when managers do that, of course, there are tremendous gains that follow.
Yes, and another thing that you say in this particular behavior that I think is really important to point out too is you talk about, when necessary, stick up for your employees. Sometimes you need to be able to defend them when maybe other people are questioning their contributions or what they can actually do. I think that's also really important to bring out for this particular behavior.
Right, and this is one of the things that employees indicated that they most want from their manager in the display of this behavior, is that if there's criticism that comes from outside the team, outside the unit, that's unwarranted, the employee expects the manager to stick up for the employee, explain why the criticism is unfounded, and make sure that whoever's doing the criticizing is better educated and understanding of what the true situation is. When managers do that, of course, they're building tremendous loyalty and engagement from their teams, from their individual employees, and it also is going to contribute to one of the attributes we'll talk about later, which is the value of being fair and just. I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be just. I'm not going to allow my employees to be pushed around in ways that aren't justified. If there's feedback to be rendered and if there's development that is needed, fine, we'll go to work on that. But unjust criticism, managers need to step up and address that.
Mm-hmm. Develop some backbone, if you will.
Exactly.
Okay. So the second behavior that you have in your book, and by the way, let me also say this for our listeners and viewers, Jack, is that I really appreciate that you've really, it's very tight what you've done, and you've delineated these 8 key attributes, and then you've given us what does that look like in action. That's really important. I love that. And then of course all of the stories and the anecdotes from the actual voices of the employees. It's just tremendous. So the second attribute or the second behavior now is providing recognition. If you could talk about that.
Right. Providing recognition. I have a couple of brothers who come out of the accounting background. They would say that this is the sleeves from your vest. In other words, it really doesn't cost you anything. It's a matter of being aware and exerting the time and energy to make sure that people are shown appreciation. So this goes back to the literal, pat on the back, attaboy, attagirl, thank you for the contribution you're making, greatly appreciated. Of course, how appreciation or recognition is delivered really needs to depend on what's most meaningful to the employee. Some employees like to be in the limelight. For them, the greatest sense of recognition would be to be recognized, if you will, in the chain of command. So the boss's boss and boss's boss's boss also see this employee spotlighted, if you will. Others don't want that. They're shy. They would much prefer private recognition. So the manager needs to know exactly how to accomplish that. But by all means, this is a huge contributor to employee motivation and commitment.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing that I want to echo that you say in your book is that it's important to show appreciation for their level of expertise that they have developed on their time on the job and recognize the passion and energy they bring to their work. So why I think that's important for the work that I do, Jack, is that I'm all about creating workplaces where people can thrive. And when a manager can see, wow, do you know you're a rock star at this? Did you know that you have distinguished skill in this? we discover so much of who we can become in this world through the work that we do. And oftentimes when somebody recognizes something that's special and unique about us, we didn't know that ourselves until they point it out. So I really wanted to celebrate that piece that you talk about in your book in that regard.
Right. I mean, kind of the old-fashioned definition of success is working your way up the chain of command, the corporate ladder, so to speak. But we have so many people, especially in our economy today, who are what I would call senior technical experts. They don't really necessarily have a desire to manage others. They just have a desire to be really good at what they do. And they may be in the same position with the same job title for several years. But those are the people that are, just as you pointed out, really the ones who are really deserving of that recognition, because the contribution they make is substantial based on the well of experience that they draw upon to get their jobs done.
Oh, I can't resist going here, Jack. So next week, I've got Stefan Falk coming on talking about his book, Intrinsic Motivation. And what he's really getting at is learning to love the work that we do, to be motivated from it intrinsically like that. But I map it back to just what you just said. In my own research on meaning and work, one of the things that I discovered is when people can feel competent in their work, when they derive a sense of tremendous satisfaction because they're competent, they know their stuff, they have command in their craft, tremendous sense of fulfillment that comes from that. Very motivating for people, which is what I think you're speaking to.
No, absolutely. I mean, I would argue that as some researchers and theorists have put forward, that there are three basic needs that need to be met. This applies to the workplace as well. We need to feel competent and believe that we're seen as competent. We need to have a sense of belonging, feel that we're part of a team and recognized as such. And we also need to be able to operate with some degree of independence, some degree of autonomy. And when those needs are met, that's when motivation accelerates, and as a result, performance improves as well.
Wonderful way to complement what we've been talking about. It's already time for our first break. If you can imagine that, it goes by so fast. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Dr. Jack Wiley, who's the author of The Employee-Centric Manager, 8 Keys to People Management Effectiveness. We've been talking a bit about a few of the key attributes in the book. After the break, we're going to continue on with the rest. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. If you're just tuning in, my guest is Dr. Jack Wiley, who is president and CEO of both Employee Centricity and Jack Wiley Consulting. He's also serving as the chief scientific officer at Engage to Excel. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So we were boogieing along there through these different attributes. I wanted to next hit another key attribute that you talk about, a behavior, which I have to say really kind of hurts my heart that we even have to call this out, Jack. But one of the behaviors that you have found that people really want from their managers is to be treated with dignity and respect.
Right. I think this surprised us a little bit too, but it was so important, and a significant portion of the world's workforce identified this as what they most wanted from their immediate boss, to be treated with a sense of dignity and respect. And what they're really talking about is that assume that I come to the job with an intent to perform well. Right. So it's a basic sense of communicating trust that I'm there with good intent to help accomplish the goals of my job and of the team overall. And I think the more that people are given a sense of participation in decisions that affect their work, that's a way in which dignity and respect is demonstrated. And of course, we want to work for bosses who are concerned about our safety, our well-being. We treat people with dignity and respect when we ensure that their working conditions are safe, including both physical safety, but also psychological safety. These are all elements of how we treat people with dignity and respect. In many ways, it goes back to kind of the principle of reciprocity. Think about how you like to be treated, and then treat people the same way. We have religious teaching that backs that up as well.
So I want to say two things to that. One is years I've spent also just doing just straight out employee engagement measures and response to help develop managers around that. And what we discovered is that people actually, their engagement level would radically increase if people just, as they were passing them by the hallways, would just say hello. A simple gesture of acknowledging your humanity would go a long way, that you actually exist as a human being. So that's one thing. The first thing that I wanted to say in response to this particular behavior, treating employees with dignity and respect, is what I see in my work is that when I'm working with leaders is that they oftentimes, they're very ignorant of their own strengths. And so what's really easy and natural for them, they get kind of frustrated and sometimes even disgusted with people who can't keep up with them. Those are your strengths, sir, ma'am, not theirs. So that's where I think sometimes that we lose respect and dignity, is that people are unaware, managers are unaware of their own abilities and strengths and expect their team to have the same without looking for what's special and unique about them.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And interestingly enough, there's a little bit of a flip side of that too, and that is that employees don't want their managers to pretend to know how to do something when they really don't. That's not treating people in the right way. It's trying to present yourself as an expert when in fact the employees are probably the experts. They're the ones who need to be tapped into. It's their ideas that are going to power the organization, the team forward. And employees also don't like to be overly punished for mistakes that they make. Coming down too hard with harsh criticism isn't really the way to build a more cohesive team.
Right. It's funny how we human beings don't like to be punished. It's not a very motivating way for most of us to go on. Yes, I can appreciate that. And speaking of what you've been talking about, that brings us to our next behavior that you showcase here, and that employees want to be communicated clear performance expectations. Seems very reasonable and rational to me, and yet I also know that in many organizations this does not actually happen.
Yeah, that is so true. In fact, I just completed a training program with a group of managers from one company. And when we looked at the overall strengths that they brought to bear, actually communicating clear performance expectations was probably their weakest performing attribute. And in a way, I think that is surprising because it's so fundamental to what is the role of a manager. You would think that this would be part and parcel of being a supervisor or manager, regardless of the level at which you operate. Employees want to understand what defines success. So I'm here with good intent to help you achieve the objectives you have in mind. Help me understand exactly what you define as good performance. And oh, by the way, if I'm a knowledge worker and I'm working with some independence on a variety of different projects, help me understand the priorities of how I need to fashion my work so that it meets your time schedules, meets your demands, your requirements. So this is pretty fundamental. And also, part of communicating clear performance expectations is providing me with helpful and useful feedback on how I can improve. If something isn't going right, intervene, help me understand how I could do better. It's about hitting the target, and employees want their managers to help them hit the target so that everyone can be successful.
This is just so rich, Jack. I just love this. I'm not going to want to let you go when it's time, just so you know. So we'll have to talk about some of your other books on another session. But the other thing that you say that I definitely want to connect for the purposes of this show and my work is you also say that when you communicate performance expectations, that people also want to be able to connect their work to the bigger purpose of the organization and recognize and its mission and its value. So recognize, where is your work and why we're actually in existence as a company. Critical. I love that. And the other thing too that I wanted to be able to showcase on this is It occurs to me that part of the reason this is such a problem in organizations is that the managers or the leadership team hasn't really thought through well what does success look like in this particular role. So they haven't even done the work to be able to understand for themselves, how will I know when this person has succeeded? Do you have any research or data on that?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the problem is that too many managers are in positions where they haven't done the actual work.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily know what's required to achieve the task outcome under consideration. And therefore, they can't immediately recognize great performance when they see it because they don't have the perspective or the background or the horizon, if you will, to understand where this fits within, the bandwidth of poor to good performance. And so managers who have this greater understanding are ones who should be in a position to offer that recognition and that positive, helpful feedback to employees. But I think that's the state of things. So what it speaks to is managers need to invest more time and energy to understand the job, what facilitates the accomplishment of the work, what gets in the way of getting the work done, so that they can be better informed about what is good performance on the part of their subordinates.
Extremely well articulated. One other thing that I also want to add to this that I think is important, so since we're talking about communication here and this particular behavior, one of the things that I also notice in the work that I do is managers and leaders have a very difficult time communicating when somebody isn't actually performing to the standard that they want. They lack the skill to be able to address that in a way that actually can help the employee and in a way that is done with respect and dignity and actually gives them a way to be able to improve. There's a real missing in competence in managers to be able to convey that kind of corrective, learning abled sort of feedback. I see that over and over again.
Yeah, I do too. My experience is very similar to what you just described. I think that almost every organization I speak to, they wish their managers were more effective at providing useful performance feedback.
Yes.
And of course, one of the keys there is that we need to share observations and ideas for how we can improve rather than sharing conclusions about an employee's ability to accomplish something.
Yes.
Let's share what we're seeing and how it could be more efficiently or better accomplished. But let's not label employees or share conclusions, draw conclusions that aren't warranted because either people haven't been properly trained to do the work they're asked to do, or they haven't been given the guidance on what defines success.
Yes. So managers who can do that are just so distinctive. So now let's go on to the next behavior, which again is so important, rewarding performance contributions. When we actually do perform well, being able to actually reward that is important.
Indeed. And I think this is one that when managers think through the taxonomy that you're taking us through right now about what employees most want, they struggle with a little bit because they think about this in terms of their limited ability to influence compensation outcomes. But I think they're sub-optimizing in terms of thinking about how much influence they can have over the employee experience of being rewarded financially for the work that they do. It's not always a big bonus or a big merit increase, but it's also could be spot rewards. It could be pizza lunches. It could be a one-on-one discussion with the manager at a nice, decent professional restaurant. Any of those things, are contributing to the sense of I'm being rewarded for the contributions that I'm making. But the other thing that's really important about this, Elise, is that actually when employees said that I want my manager to reward my performance contributions, about 50% had to do with fair compensation or improved compensation, but actually about 50% had to do with training and development opportunities. Mm-hmm. Even if you're limited in terms of what the corporate structure will allow in terms of merit increase budgets and so forth, work with me based on your understanding from our previous conversations, work with me to provide training and development opportunities that are going to broaden my skill set, hopefully put me in a position to be promoted into a job I aspire to, which of course is going to bring different job title, a different level of pay, and different opportunities. And so it's 50% about fair comp, but it's 50% about training and development opportunities.
That's so critical and key, especially since I think we both know that, what is it? Most organizations invest maybe 1% of their overall budget in training and development. Isn't it something like that, right?
Yeah. And then they're surprised why their employees don't develop.
What do you mean? You're sitting at your desk all day. What's happening to you? Yeah, I'm kind of amazed at that as well. And one of the other things too that you say on this one that I think is important is it's something about, you said, to when you're looking at increases, to be able to reward them for their performance, not just their tenure. What did they actually do? It's not a matter of how long have you been able to stick around, but what have you actually been able to do that we're rewarding here?
Right. And of course, I mean, there are different compensation schemes that probably fit different industries and different organizations in different ways. But the more it can be personalized to the actual contribution that the employee is making, the greater the impact will be of those decisions and following through with that expectation of employees. It's going to produce a better outcome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Okay, so now those were the 5 behaviors. We went over the 5 behaviors. Now we're going to get into one skill that you say is essential to achieve success as a people manager, and that is to demonstrate competence in problem solving and decision making. Talk to us about that one, if you would.
Right. Well, first of all, I labeled this as a skill, and both you and I would understand this just even from a definitional point of view, but a skill is a practice set. It's something that we get better at, perhaps even develop an expertise at through practice. And so the example I use a lot of times with management groups is in sports, and particularly the sport of basketball, free throw shooting. You get better at free throw shooting through practice, and you can track your percent as a measure of success. And so that's what employees want from their manager, is not simply that they make decisions and solve problems, but that they are good at it. So they want to work, and of course that's going to bring in cognitive mental ability. We want to work for smart managers who learn over time how to make better decisions and solve problems more readily and more efficiently. But this, in essence, is what it's really about. And when that happens, when you work for such a manager, then obstacles are eliminated more quickly. Progress of the team is faster. People are more satisfied with the content of their jobs. They don't experience that sense of frustration that may come without, when we can't identify a good solution to a problem. Or, and this happens, it's happened to me in my career, working for managers who are unwilling to make a decision for fear of future blame if the decision doesn't go right. So all of these things relate to what employees want from a manager. Be good at problem solving, decision making, think through the downstream consequences, use data to make those decisions. And oh, by the way, ask employees what they would do, because often they are the best informed about what's getting in the way, what it might take to better serve our customers, how we can improve the quality of our products. And when you tap into that resource, you're doing a couple of things. You're treating them with dignity and respect, but you're also putting on the table additional potential options, some of which may be the best solutions available.
Oh, wonderful. There's just so much there. And again, ladies and gentlemen, we're scratching the surface here. So there's much more that you can learn in the book, and I'll certainly recommend that as well. And on that note, maybe you can take a look and go onto Amazon now while we do our next break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on air with Dr. Jack Wiley, who's the author of The Employee-Centric Manager, 8 Keys to People Management Effectiveness. We've been talking through 5 of the behaviors that he has found in his book, and one key skill. After the break, we're going to hit those 2 values. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. If you're just joining the program today, my guest is Dr. Jack Wiley, who is the president and CEO of both Employee Centricity and Jack Wiley Consulting. He also serves as the chief scientific officer at Engage to Excel. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this last segment here, let's, if we can, cover up on those the two key values. One of the things I really appreciate about this is, right, when we talk about values, one of those values is being fair and just. Without what you did here, really describing what you mean by that could go all different kinds of ways. So I really appreciate how specific you were about just what those values are and how they play out in action. So can you bring those home for us?
Right. No, I appreciate that introduction, and let me hit the pause button on that for just a moment. I think what surprised me, Elise, from the research was that about 1 of every 5 employees around the world identified one of these two values as what they most wanted from their immediate boss. So we can have arguments about whether or not this is a behavior or if it's a value, and some in the research circles would want to do that. I actually see these very importantly as personal standards of conduct. This is how I want my boss to operate, and the first one is being fair and just. And so this is the whole notion of treating people equitably, enforcing the rules consistently, making sure that if you're going to give flexibility to some, that same flexibility is provided to others. Employees don't have a positive reaction to pet employees receiving preferential treatment. And one of the other things that I recognize from the verbatim feedback from employees was that they don't want the manager to tolerate over a period of time subpar performance. That's right. Actually not fair to the rest of the members on the team. Right. And they expect either that performance to come up to a reasonable level of performance, or that the manager is going to do what's right and move the person into a role where they can be successful, or if necessary, out of the organization.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you saying that, Jack, because I've seen that as well. It just reduces the whole morale of the organization when you start to see that person gets to keep their job and they're doing 30% of my job, what I'm doing. Very demoralizing for people. Okay, so then that brings us to the other value here of being honest and trustworthy.
Right. Again, a basic personal standard of conduct. We might define this as the kind of operational definition of integrity, which is doing what you say you are going to do. So honesty and trustworthiness has to do with communicating in a forthright, frank, honest way, so that you have credibility with employees with regard to what you have to say, to be sufficiently revealing, so that there's an understanding of why things are the way they are, and what to expect. When managers fail to do that, they're leaving a lot of potential motivation on the table, not to mention loyalty to the manager. So employees don't want their managers to operate as if they're above the rules, kind of rules for me, but different set of rules for you. They don't appreciate that. And they want to work, interestingly enough, they want to work for a manager who takes their job seriously. So, it's almost as if the picture is worth 1,000 words. This is what you say you want. Are you reflecting that in your own behavior? For the managers who do, of course, they have a natural advantage in terms of employee engagement and motivation and commitment when they take their job seriously and they operate according to a high standard of performance themselves.
Mm-hmm. And while we're on the topic of honesty and trustworthiness, one of the other things that I think is really important that you also talk about in your book here in terms of actions is for managers to ask questions when they don't know something. I've seen so many managers who believe they're supposed to know everything or have all the answers, or else why would they have the job that they do? When in fact, they're much more credible when they actually say, I don't know what you mean. Tell me more about that.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I come to this with an understanding that employees are extremely well informed about what works, what doesn't work, what gets in the way, what facilitates the accomplishment of work. And managers who aren't tapping into that are just not taking advantage of a tremendous resource available to them. Now, the flip side of the point you made, which I believe is an excellent point, is that managers should also be willing to admit when they've made a mistake, when they're wrong.
Yes.
This didn't work. I'm the one who made the decision. This was my call. I learned something from this. We'll all get better as a result. But I bear the responsibility for this. And so that also, really contributes to the sense of motivation and loyalty that employees have to work for a particular manager.
Yes, and you know what else is really wonderful about that? When we can admit our own mistakes, we make it safe for other people to do the same.
Exactly.
Right. So I've had some fantastic people on my show, Jack, who've talked about the role of fear in organizations and toxicity, et cetera. And so if we as the manager can say, gosh, I messed that up. That was my idea. And look what happened there. We just create a space for others to be able to own their own mistakes too, and not be afraid of actually doing that, not being afraid to speak up that they actually made a mistake.
Right. Another example of modeling the very kind of behavior that's going to produce a much more positive work experience for employees.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about this earlier here, but I really am often very exasperated about how few companies will invest training and managing people. So I don't remember who it was that had on my show, and I don't remember exactly the stats, but the person said something like, by the time a person gets their first management job, and you probably know this somewhere in your research, is something like, let's call it late 20s, but they don't actually get any formal training to be a manager until they're in their 30s. So it's so backwards. It's such a mess. What's that all about? Do you have any stats on that?
Right. I actually hit the pause button in the writing on the book, and decided I need to go out and do a little bit of additional research, and actually did a survey of a representative sample of 1,000 managers in the United States, and actually asked them about the amount of training and development they receive specifically to be a people manager. And by the way, the estimates are that there are 24 million managers in the United States alone who have responsibility for managing the work of others. But what I found out from this research was that 70% of the respondents indicated that they'd either received no people management training or that it had been capped at 4 hours. So, when you think about the centrality of people management responsibilities to the manager's job, to receive no more investment of training and development to perform that work is astounding. And you wonder, how much are organizations leaving on the table in terms of unrealized engagement, unrealized performance, unrealized talent retention, because they haven't invested in the development of their managers.
Yes, and I would add one other thing too. And I had Tim Spiker on my show some years ago, and he really talks about how the repercussions, the ripple effect of a good or a bad manager on an individual's life and their family and their communities. It's really, so the job is so important. And to your point, we're not equipping people with the skills to be able to do it effectively.
Yeah, agreed. There are issues that I think are very important to consider in this as well that are related. For example, when I look at how managers rate themselves on kind of core competencies of being a manager, it's often about 15 or 20% higher than how they would be rated by employees. Not always. We have some great humble managers who are often rated very favorably by their employees, but on average, managers tend to overestimate their own competence. And what I've also found when I've asked them, what do you think employees most want from you? There are some big gaps between what employees want and what managers think they want. For example, and this is almost incredible, but 13% of employees said the most important thing they want is recognition from their manager. When I asked managers, only 1% identified recognition as what employees most want from them. So we have some real gaps in understanding as well.
I appreciated how you actually delineate that in your book as well. It's really very effective and shows a major disconnect. So as you heard me say earlier, but the show is very much about educating and inspiring listeners and viewers about the world of work and leadership. But at this point, if you have just a short case study or something you could share about how you've seen an organization improve by embracing these whatever you want to call them, attributes.
Attributes, right.
That'd be great.
Right. Well, I operate on, I think, what you would identify as well as kind of a fundamental cycle of personal development. So we go into organizations. The first thing we do is to assess where managers are right now on their display of these attributes. So therefore, we're creating awareness. Then they enter into a very hands-on training program that gives them the scoop on how they can become better at the display of each of those attributes. But they walk out of the training program with an action plan on a short list of attributes that they think they must focus on. And number 4, they must share their action plan with their boss, who's going to help them remain accountable to improving in these areas. And then the 5th step is reassessment. So we reassess at 6 months or 9 months post-training to see whether or not the manager's actually improving in the display of these attributes. And we know, because of the research that went into the book, that the greater the display of these attributes, the more favorable the work experience for employees, the higher their employee engagement index scores, the better the interpersonal team chemistry, and actually, very significantly, the higher the team performance, which is sort of the bottom line for most organizations. And so there is a validity to improving your display of these attributes because it directly impacts experience, engagement, cohesion, and performance.
Sounds good to me. Sign me up. So, I think by this point, Jack, that this show, it's been on air for 8 years, and it's listened to by people around the world who really do care about creating workplaces where people can thrive. They can grow into their best, highest potential. We develop these kinds of effective, inspirational leaders that lead them to their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. What would you like to leave them with today?
Right. I think that the role of the manager is so critical to the success of the organization and to how employees feel about their work. And there's tremendous dignity in having a job, having work that you can perform well. And as you've already said, these spillover effects in terms of families, in terms of communities, when we're in a good job that taps well our skills and interests, when we're working with people who we feel a sense of belongingness with, that's going to influence, how good we are as a partner in a relationship, as a husband or wife, as a father or mother, and more broadly, we're going to be able to make contributions in ways that are positive within the communities in which we operate. And so I see becoming a more employee-centric manager as critical to the development of individuals, of teams, of organizations, and even more broadly, if I may, the communities in which we operate.
I completely agree with you, Dr. Wiley, and I see all of that as really a contribution to raising consciousness around the world, and we're both, I think, committed to that. And I'm very, very happy to know you. Very glad to have read your book and now know you. Would love to have other conversations with you on air, so we'll be in touch about that. But thank you for being on Working on Purpose.
Thank you so much.
Listeners and viewers, if you want to learn more about Dr. Wiley, his books, his work, you can start by visiting one website. It's employeecentricity.com. Again, employeecentricity. That's employeecentricity.com. Tune in for next week's Working on Purpose program for another inspiring dose of leadership and business education. See you there. Remember that work is an integral and important part of our lives and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.